You won't believe what this undercover boss discovered. His cook wasn't stealing food. It was something much worse. Welcome to the channel. Before we dive in, hit the like button and subscribe. Thank you. Let's get back to the story now. Nathan Graves leaned into the cracked mirror of his motel bathroom and took a long, steadying breath. The steam from the shower clung to the glass, blurring the reflection of the man staring back at him. Gone were the crisp suits and polished shoes. In their place stood a weary-looking man in a faded flannel shirt, a gray beanie pulled low over his brow, and work boots scuffed from deliberately dragging them through gravel in the parking lot. He hadn't looked like a CEO in days, and that was the point. Nathan, 51, was the founder and CEO of Graveside Eats, a once-beloved diner chain that had grown from a single roadside cafe into a network of 26 locations across the Midwest. It was a business built on humble values: honest food, good service, and treating every employee like family. But in the past year, something had shifted. He'd received a string of anonymous complaints from employees about being overworked, disrespected, even neglected. Health inspection scores had dipped. Morale was down. And worst of all, turnover at several locations had doubled. It didn't add up. His district managers assured him everything was running fine. The numbers on the surface still looked decent. But Nathan had learned long ago that spreadsheets don't tell stories. People do. That's why he was standing in a cheap motel outside of Fairfield, Illinois, miles away from his downtown Chicago office and far removed from the corporate image he usually maintained. He'd chosen this location carefully. The Fairfield Diner was one of his oldest, the third location he ever opened, and it had recently lost both its assistant manager and 2 cooks in the same month. The regional manager blamed work ethic issues. Nathan wasn't convinced. His disguise was simple but effective. A fake name, Mike Harper. A temporary ID badge printed at headquarters under the ruse of testing a new internal training program. And a cover story, ex-truck driver turned kitchen helper, looking to pick up extra work. The plan was to work a full week in the back of the house, quietly observing, blending in with the crew, and getting a real sense of what was happening inside his company. No cameras. No fancy production crew. Just raw, unfiltered truth. At 6:42 a.m., Nathan walked into the diner through the rear entrance, just as the breakfast shift began. The back door creaked loudly, a sound he immediately made a mental note to fix. The kitchen was already alive with noise, pans clanging, timers beeping, someone cursing under their breath as the fryer hissed violently. The air was thick with the smell of bacon grease, burnt toast, and stale coffee. He was greeted by a teenage hostess who barely looked up from her phone before pointing toward the back prep area and muttering, "New guy? Yeah, go find Rick." Rick turned out to be the store manager, mid-40s, buzz cut, with a gut barely restrained by a stretched uniform polo. He looked up from his clipboard with suspicion. "You're the temp?" he asked, as if the concept was somehow offensive. Nathan nodded, offered a firm handshake, and repeated the alias. "Mike Harper, just here to lend a hand." Rick didn't return the handshake. Instead, he jerked his thumb toward a cramped prep station in the corner of the kitchen. "Keep up. We're already behind." Nathan didn't respond. He just rolled up his sleeves and got to work. The kitchen was understaffed, just like the reports had said. There were only 3 people back there, not including Rick, who mostly barked orders from the sidelines. There was a teenage dishwasher named Lexi who looked like she hadn't slept in days, a line cook named George who never made eye contact, and finally, a man who immediately caught Nathan's attention. He was tall, maybe mid-30s, with a lean build and sunken cheeks. His name tag read Luis, and he moved like someone who had been doing this work for years. He wasn't flashy, didn't talk much, but he worked fast and clean. Every movement was efficient. He didn't waste a second. When George fumbled an order or Lexi forgot to restock the paper towels, Luis picked up the slack without a word. Nathan watched him closely all morning. Despite the heat and the chaos, Luis didn't complain. He didn't slow down, but there was something about the way he carried himself, tight shoulders, clenched jaw, eyes that seemed to drift toward the clock every few minutes, that made Nathan wonder. He didn't eat. He didn't drink. He didn't even seem to take a bathroom break. During a lull around 10:30 a.m., Nathan tried to spark up a conversation. "First day jitters," he said, grinning as he peeled potatoes. "This place always this crazy." Luis offered a faint smile, but didn't look up. "Could be worse." "You been here long?" Luis shrugged. "Couple months." "You like it?" This time, Luis didn't answer right away. He glanced toward the kitchen entrance, where Rick was laughing loudly at something on his phone, then back at the cutting board. "It's a job," he said quietly. Nathan nodded and didn't press further. He recognized that tone. It wasn't apathy. It was resignation, the kind of answer people give when they've stopped hoping things will get better. As the day wore on, Nathan noticed something else. Luis didn't clock out for lunch. Neither did Lexi, but she at least grabbed a granola bar from her backpack. Luis just kept working. When the shift ended at 3 p.m., Nathan lingered in the back, pretending to wipe down counters, just to see what Luis would do. The others clocked out. Rick finally disappeared to his office. But Luis stayed behind. Alone in the kitchen, he moved to the dish pit, glanced around, and then, like he'd done it 1,000 times, reached into the trash can and pulled out half a sandwich wrapped in wax paper. Not from a plate. Not spoiled. Just discarded. He sat on an overturned milk crate, crouched low, and began eating quietly, slowly, like someone who was trying not to be seen. Nathan stood frozen, just around the corner. His stomach turned. He wanted to believe he was seeing it wrong. That maybe Luis was just frugal, or saving money, or being practical. But the way he looked over his shoulder every few seconds told a different story. Something was deeply wrong. That night, back at his motel, Nathan couldn't sleep. He lay awake staring at the ceiling, playing the scene over and over in his mind. A cook, in his restaurant, eating out of the trash. He felt angry, embarrassed, but mostly he felt responsible. This wasn't just about bad management anymore. It was about dignity, and he needed to know the full story. The next morning, Nathan Graves woke with a sense of urgency gripping his chest. The image of Luis crouched by the trash bin gnawed at him all night, refusing to loosen its grip. He knew what he saw. He also knew that for someone to scavenge food, in a kitchen full of it, meant something had gone terribly wrong, either with that man's life or with the way his diner was being run, or both. He didn't come all this way to observe from the sidelines. He was going to find out the truth. He arrived before dawn and parked his rental car on the far side of the lot. From the outside, the Fairfield location still looked like one of Graveside Eats' flagship diners. Clean signage, cozy wood paneling, big bay windows with red checkered curtains. But Nathan was starting to realize that a polished facade could cover up a rotting foundation. And that morning, he was determined to get beneath the surface. Inside the kitchen, the atmosphere was subdued. Luis had already arrived. He was at the grill, moving with that same quiet efficiency, prepping bacon and eggs for the breakfast rush. His eyes looked heavy, ringed with sleeplessness, but his hands didn't falter. Nathan clocked in silently and joined him at the station, sliding into the rhythm without a word. For the first hour, they worked in tandem. Luis handling the protein, Nathan manning the toast and hash browns, passing plates silently down the line. Around 7:10 a.m., Rick arrived. The manager entered with the swagger of someone who owned the place. He wore mirrored sunglasses despite the cloudy morning and immediately began issuing orders like a drill sergeant with a hangover. "Luis, pick up the pace on those breakfast combos. Mike, you're heavy on the butter. Nobody want a heart attack this early." Nathan bit back a retort. He was already tired of the way Rick barked instead of led. The man didn't ask. He demanded. He didn't guide. He micromanaged. And he clearly had favorites. Luis was not one of them. At one point, Nathan watched as Rick cornered Lexi in the dry storage room. From where he stood, Nathan couldn't hear every word, but Rick's posture was unmistakable. Leaning in, pointing fingers, gesturing aggressively. Lexi emerged moments later, her face red and her jaw tight. She avoided eye contact with everyone for the next 2 hours. But what caught Nathan's attention most that morning was Luis's silence. Not once did he speak unless directly spoken to. Not once did he ask for help. He just worked. When the grease trap backed up, he cleaned it. When the fryer began to smoke, he fixed it. And when George accidentally dumped a tray of raw bacon onto the floor, Luis silently picked it up, cleaned the area, and restarted the batch without complaint. It was around 10:30 a.m. when Nathan finally found his chance. Luis was refilling the ketchup bottles at the side station, and Nathan approached with a carton of clean ramekins. "Ever take a break?" Nathan asked casually, stacking the ramekins beside him. Luis gave a half shrug. "Not really. Not much point." "You don't eat either," Nathan said, keeping his voice neutral. "Saw you yesterday." Luis froze for a second. His hand paused mid-motion, ketchup bottle suspended in the air. "You saw that?" Nathan nodded slowly. "Yeah." Luis exhaled, set down the bottle, and glanced around to make sure Rick wasn't nearby. "Look, it's not what you think." "Then help me understand," Nathan said softly. Luis looked at him for a long moment. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, he said, "I've got a kid, 7 years old. His name's Mateo. He's staying with my sister right now. She's been feeding him since I ran out of money 2 weeks ago. Rent's overdue. My truck broke down. I walk here now, every day, for miles." Nathan's throat tightened. "I used to be a mechanic," Luis continued. "Had a good setup. But when COVID hit, the shop closed. Never opened back up. I bounced around jobs. Did construction, landscaping, anything I could find. This diner gave me a shot. I'm grateful, I am. But man, the pay barely covers anything. And when you're behind, you're always behind. I didn't eat that sandwich because I wanted to. I ate it because I hadn't had anything in 2 days." Nathan had to look away. He felt his heart sink with the weight of truth and shame. This was what had become of his vision. This was what his employees were enduring while district managers reported all systems normal. "And Rick?" Nathan asked, steadying his voice. "You know about any of this?" Luis let out a bitter laugh. "Rick? He once told me if I wanted food, I should work faster so I can afford it. Said this ain't a charity kitchen." Nathan's hands curled into fists at his side. "Don't get me wrong," Luis added. "Some of the people here are kind. Lexi gave me a granola bar the other day. George looked the other way when I took an extra biscuit once. But no one can afford to help for long. We're all stretched thin." Nathan nodded, then placed a hand on Luis's shoulder. "Thanks for telling me," he said. Luis nodded back, but his eyes were guarded. Trust, clearly, didn't come easy anymore. Later that afternoon, during the slow lull before the dinner shift, Nathan pulled Lexi aside. She looked startled at first, but relaxed when he asked about Luis. And then she opened up, more than he expected. "He's the best cook we have," she said immediately. "Never complains. Always helps. He's the only one who stays late to clean the grill when Rick skips out early. And he never takes food unless it's going to be thrown out. I don't know what his full story is, but I know he deserves better." Nathan asked a few more questions, including why Lexi hadn't reported Rick's behavior. Her answer cut deep. "Because HR's just a voicemail box. Nobody ever calls back." That night, Nathan skipped the motel. He drove 2 hours back to his home office in Chicago, walked into his penthouse kitchen, and sat down with his personal laptop. He opened a blank document and wrote 3 words in bold font. "The system's broken." The next day, the real change would begin. The next morning, as Elias returned to the kitchen in the same uniform as before, he found himself moving slower, more focused, weighed down not by exhaustion, but by what he had witnessed the night before. The image of Jonah huddled over a half-eaten plate in the dark, scarfing down what was never meant to be his, haunted him. Elias couldn't shake the gnawing feeling in his gut, not of betrayal, but of worry. What would drive a man, proud and quiet, to steal food in the shadows? He observed Jonah as he entered the kitchen around 6:45 a.m., 15 minutes early again, like clockwork. His apron already stained from prepping the morning batch of hash browns and biscuits. Jonah worked as if the night before had never happened. No guilt, no hesitation, just precision and routine. It was as if Jonah had been doing this job his whole life. Elias watched as Jonah kneaded dough, chopped vegetables, and handled the grill with graceful urgency. Everything about him screamed professionalism, except the dark circles under his eyes and the pallor of his skin, which Elias now saw in a new light. It wasn't just overwork, it was hunger. Deep, unrelenting hunger. Between deliveries and prep, Elias decided to stay close. He shadowed Jonah throughout the morning, making small talk when he could, lending a hand here and there, but mostly observing. Not in the way a boss would, but like someone searching for cracks in a wall that had been painted over too many times. Around 10:15 a.m., a brief lull in orders allowed the staff to take their first scheduled breaks. Most of them scattered to the alleyway for a smoke or to the break room for coffee. Jonah, however, wiped his hands on a towel, looked at the clock, and quietly returned to the dish pit, not to rest, but to scrub what others had left behind. Elias followed silently, pretending to look for a mop. As Jonah sprayed down a mountain of plates, Elias asked gently, "Don't you ever take a break, man?" Jonah didn't flinch. "Not really my thing," he said with a faint smile. "Idle hands and all that." There was no defensiveness in his voice, but it was clear this man had no time for rest, or he didn't believe he deserved it. The answer hit Elias harder than he expected. Later, as the lunch rush picked up, Elias stayed on fries while Jonah handled the grill. Tickets flooded in, and Jonah moved like a machine, flipping, seasoning, plating, all while managing to keep calm under pressure. The other line cook, Ray, muttered a complaint when the printer jammed, but Jonah fixed it in seconds, then returned to the stove without a word. His skill and focus made it all too easy for others to lean on him, to expect him to carry more. Elias saw it all with fresh eyes now. How the manager never thanked him, how the hostess always passed extra orders his way, how he worked through breaks and stayed late, only to be forgotten when things went smoothly. Jonah was the backbone of this place, but no one seemed to realize he was cracking under the weight. By the time 3 p.m. rolled around, Jonah's shift technically ended, but he stayed to prep for dinner. Elias offered to cover his station, but Jonah waved him off. "I'll be out of here soon. Got stuff to do." And just like that, he disappeared again. Elias couldn't take it anymore. He needed to know more. He waited until Jonah left, then asked quietly around the staff, casual, friendly, pretending to be curious. Ray only shrugged. "He's been here a while. Keeps to himself. Works like a dog. Weird, though. Never eats here. Ever. Always says he's not hungry." The hostess chimed in. "He's always giving away his meals. Like if we have staff dinner and someone forgets their lunch, he'll say he already ate. I used to think he was just being nice." Her voice trailed off. Elias pieced it together in his head. He wasn't being nice. He was hiding the fact he couldn't afford to eat it all. The generosity wasn't just kindness. It was sacrifice. Jonah wasn't just feeding others. He was starving himself in the process. That night, Elias waited until everyone had left before checking the time cards. Jonah had clocked out over 40 minutes late. That made 3 days in a row. As he returned to the kitchen for one final sweep, he saw it again, a plate on the counter, half full, still warm. This time it was a pork chop, mashed potatoes, and green beans. The food wasn't thrown out. It was neatly plated, fork beside it, and a chair tucked close as if it had been used. Elias didn't need to ask. He knew. Jonah had stayed late again, waiting until no one was around to eat what scraps remained. Elias felt a lump form in his throat. A man this proud, this hard-working, reduced to hiding his meals like a guilty child. The anger rose in him, not at Jonah, but at himself for not seeing it sooner. For trusting reports and spreadsheets over real people. For forgetting what it meant to lead from the heart. That night, Elias didn't sleep. He sat in his motel room, laptop open, searching Jonah's file. No complaints, no write-ups. For years with the company. Glowing performance reviews. Never asked for a raise. Never took sick days. Elias dug deeper. An address in a rundown part of town. Emergency contact. None listed. Dependents. 1. Then it hit him. Jonah was a single father. That explained the late-night shifts, the skipped meals, the silence. Elias leaned back in his chair, staring at the screen. This wasn't just a loyal employee. This was a man sacrificing everything, health, pride, dignity, to survive and provide for someone else. And no one had noticed. No one had thanked him. No one had helped. The next morning, Elias returned to the diner before sunrise, his mind made up. He greeted Jonah at the back door, surprising him. "Early bird today, huh?" Jonah joked. Elias smiled, but his heart ached. "Something like that," he replied. He watched Jonah unlock the back, tie on his apron, and head straight to the kitchen. As the sun rose behind them, Elias knew this man deserved the world, and he was going to make damn sure he got more than leftovers. The following Monday, Elias arrived at the diner dressed in the same grease-smeared apron, but this time, the gravity of his presence was different. No longer just a man undercover. He was now a man with a mission. A plan had begun to form in his head over the weekend, but it wasn't just about helping Jonah quietly. It was about understanding how many others like him were being overlooked, underestimated, or pushed to the margins by a system that had become too detached from its own beating heart. But first, he needed to talk to Jonah, not as a fellow kitchen grunt, but as the man responsible for everything Jonah had been carrying alone. That morning, Jonah moved slower than usual. His hands trembled slightly while cracking eggs onto the flat-top grill, and a slight limp was visible in his right leg. Elias noticed at the moment he walked in, it wasn't their last week. The burn on his forearm, which had blistered over the weekend, was now exposed and raw. But Jonah never complained, never once asked for help. When Elias asked if he was okay, Jonah just chuckled and muttered, "Just a long weekend. You know how it is." Elias didn't push, not yet. Instead, he watched. He observed how Jonah still moved through the morning prep with surgical precision, greeting coworkers with a nod, even when they barely returned it. He noticed how Jonah passed off his staff breakfast once again to a new dishwasher who'd forgotten his lunch. And he saw how Jonah ducked behind the walk-in fridge just long enough to wipe sweat from his brow and take a few heavy breaths before re-emerging with a smile plastered on his face. It was performance art, and Elias had seen enough. After the lunch rush died down and the kitchen was relatively quiet, Elias took a chance. He motioned toward the alley door and whispered to Jonah, "Hey, you want to grab 5? I got something I want to run by you." Jonah looked surprised but nodded. The two of them stepped out into the back alley where the dumpsters sat lined like tired soldiers. The air was still thick with grease and city dust, but at least it was quieter. Elias leaned against the brick wall and took a deep breath. "Jonah, listen, I gotta be real with you, man. I'm not just another temp helping out back here." Jonah blinked, clearly confused. "What do you mean?" "I mean," Elias said, pulling the company ID badge from his pocket and flipping it open slowly. "My name's Elias Thorne. I'm the founder of this place." There was a long pause. The clatter of a dish bin echoed from inside the building. Jonah didn't react. Not with anger, not even with disbelief. Just silence. Elias continued, "I've been here for over a week now, watching, trying to understand what's really going on behind all the reports and quarterly updates. And what I've seen, Jonah, what I've seen breaks my heart." Jonah looked down, his fingers curling at his sides. "You spying on me?" he asked, voice hollow. "No," Elias said firmly. "I was learning from you." Jonah shook his head and gave a soft laugh, the kind that carried exhaustion, embarrassment, and quiet pain. "Great. You caught me stealing leftovers. I saw a man feeding himself after a 12-hour shift. There's a difference." Jonah swallowed hard, eyes still cast downward. "It's not what it looks like." "I know," Elias interrupted gently. "I did my homework. I know about your son. I know you've been taking extra shifts. I know you haven't taken a proper day off in over 5 months. And I know you've been giving away your own meals to others." Jonah's shoulders sagged like a dam breaking. He said nothing, but Elias could see it, the relief of finally being seen and the fear of what it might mean. "I'm not here to shame you," Elias said quietly. "I'm here to say thank you and to ask for your help." Jonah finally looked up. "Help?" Elias nodded. "We've built something big. This company, it's growing. But in the process, I think I lost sight of what mattered. Of who mattered. People like you. And I don't want to make that mistake again." Jonah tilted his head, cautious. "What are you asking me to do?" "I want to fix what's broken, not just for you, but for everyone working in places like this. I want to launch a new initiative, a hardship assistance program, real food security for employees, and proper checks to make sure no one gets overlooked. But I don't want it to come from the top down. I want it built from the ground up. With your help. With your voice." Jonah's eyes widened. "You want me to help you?" "You already have," Elias said simply. "Now, I just want to give you the title to go with it." Before Jonah could respond, the kitchen door burst open with a clatter. The assistant manager stepped out, yelling, "Hey, we need hands back on the line now." Elias stood up straighter. "We'll be there in a minute," he said coolly, and the manager froze at the tone. "Also, make sure Jonah gets a proper 15 today. That's not a request." The manager stuttered and nodded, disappearing back inside. Jonah blinked. I don't know what to say." Elias smiled. "You don't have to say anything. But I need you to think about this. If you had the chance to make things better for people like you, for your son, would you take it?" Jonah looked away for a moment, then back. Yeah, I would." Elias clapped him on the shoulder. "Good. Then let's start with something simple. Today you eat. Not scraps. Not leftovers. A hot meal, paid for, no apologies." Jonah nodded slowly, the weight lifting off his face little by little. That night, Jonah sat at a booth in the far corner of the diner, a full plate in front of him, a cup of coffee at his side. He ate slowly, like someone who hadn't done it in peace in a long time. Across the room, Elias watched quietly from the counter, jotting down notes, thinking about next steps, policies to rewrite, managers to replace, stories to uncover. The quiet clink of Jonah's fork was the only sound Elias needed to hear. It wasn't just a meal. It was dignity returned. But Elias knew this was only the beginning. Tomorrow, he would bring in HR. The next day, he'd start the rollout of his new employee initiative. But tonight, for the first time in a long time, he felt like a leader again. The next morning, the rain had passed, but the storm inside Elias Thorne was just beginning. He wasn't just returning to the diner now. He was arriving with authority, clarity, and a mission to rip out the rot he had discovered from the inside. In one hand, he held a leather-bound notebook filled with observations and notes from his undercover experience. In the other, he clutched a slim laptop containing personnel files, wage reports, and every formal complaint that had ever crossed his HR department's desk, but somehow never reached his eyes. He had stayed up until 3 a.m. compiling all. His eyes were tired, but his purpose was sharp as steel. The moment Elias walked through the back door of the diner, still dressed in the unassuming hoodie and jeans from his undercover days, heads turned. He was no longer pretending. The tension among the staff was palpable. Those who had seen him in the kitchen now recognized him with a different kind of stare. Not confusion, but something between awe and worry. The assistant manager, Greg, paled visibly when he saw Elias enter the break room and hang up his jacket with deliberate calm. "Morning," Elias said simply, pouring himself a cup of coffee from the burnt-smelling pot. No one responded. Jonah appeared from the pantry, face unreadable. Elias gave him a slight nod, and Jonah, still not used to this new dynamic, gave a hesitant one back. Greg tried to speak, to assert control, perhaps, or save face, but Elias cut him off with a raised finger. "Staff meeting. Now, front of house. Let's go." 10 minutes later, every employee who wasn't actively manning the stove or running a plate stood in the dining room. Even a couple of regulars sat in silence, sipping their coffee, sensing something unusual was happening. Elias stood at the center of the room near the register, his ID badge now clipped to the front of his hoodie, unmistakable. "I'm not here to make a speech," Elias began, his voice clear but heavy. "I'm here to make things right." Some of the staff shifted nervously. Others stood perfectly still, waiting. "For the past 10 days, I've been here working alongside all of you, watching, learning, and listening. And what I saw, what I felt, told me more than any report I've read in the last year ever could." His gaze swept across the room. No one dared to speak. "There's a culture in this location, not one of teamwork or dignity, but one of fear, of fatigue, of disrespect. And that ends today." Elias turned to Greg, who stood near the beverage station with a forced smile. "Greg, do you know how many formal complaints have been made about you in the last 6 months?" Greg blinked. I'm not sure, sir." 8, Elias replied. 3 for yelling at staff in front of customers. 2 for denying break requests. 1 for making inappropriate comments. And 2, the most recent, for altering the schedule so that Jonah here was working 12-day stretches with no time off." Greg started to fumble a response. That's just the nature of the business. You know how it is with staffing these days. It's hard to find." "It's not the nature of the business," Elias snapped. It's the result of lazy management and moral neglect. Greg looked stunned. Elias took a breath. I've reviewed your record. You've been with us for 3 years. You were promoted from assistant to manager based on numbers, not behavior. And that was my failure. But I'm fixing that today. Greg's jaw dropped slightly. Wait, are you? You're relieved of your duties, Elias said calmly. Effective immediately. There was a stunned silence. One of the waitresses put a hand over her mouth. Greg took a half step forward, then thought better of it. I'll have HR reach out about your severance, Elias added. But you're not stepping foot behind that line again. Greg turned, stunned, and walked slowly toward the exit. The door jingled behind him as he stepped into the street. Elias turned back to the staff. I want to talk about what happens next, he said, because this isn't just about removing a bad manager. It's about building something better together. He pulled out his notebook and flipped it open. I'm instituting a policy, effective immediately, that every employee gets 2 guaranteed breaks per shift. 1 paid, 1 unpaid. No exceptions. A few of the younger workers exchanged glances. Was this really happening? I'm increasing starting wages across all locations by 10%. And I'm introducing a hardship meals policy. If you're struggling, you eat. Period. No questions. No scum. Jonah was standing at the back now, his arms folded, but his eyes glistening with something Elias hadn't seen before. Relief. I've also created a new employee assistance fund. Discreet. Confidential. If you need help, rent, groceries, anything, you can apply. It won't go through some faceless approval board. It will come to me. One of the cooks, a single mother named Rita, blinked rapidly and looked down. She had been clocking in early to make up for hours cut from her second job. Elias had noticed it in the payroll logs. And finally, Elias said, I'm appointing Jonah here as interim location lead. Heads turned. Jonah stood like a deer in headlights. Jonah didn't ask for this, Elias added. He earned it through sacrifice, patience, and doing right by people even when no one was looking. The room burst into spontaneous applause. It wasn't dramatic, just sincere. A few claps here, a couple of nods there. But the energy shifted palpably. Elias turned back toward Jonah. You'll have training support, flexible hours, and my direct contact. You'll help me shape what comes next. Jonah, still stunned, gave a small nod. He didn't have the words, but he didn't need them. The entire staff was now looking at him not just as the quiet guy in the back, but as something more. By the time the meeting ended and the team dispersed, a strange thing happened. People lingered. They didn't just scatter back to their stations in silence. They talked, laughed, compared notes. For the first time, the break room wasn't just a room for leaning against walls and eating stale chips. It was a place of possibility. Elias stepped out back for a moment of quiet. The city hummed around him. The sky was overcast, but the air smelled clean, as if something stagnant had finally been swept away. A moment later, Jonah joined him. You didn't have to do any of this, Jonah said. Elias looked at him. Neither did you, but you did anyway. They stood there in silence for a moment. 2 men from different worlds who had found common ground in something as simple and as profound as dignity. Tomorrow, Elias said, we start rebuilding. Not just here, everywhere. It had been 4 weeks since Elias Thorne had stepped into that rundown diner disguised as just another struggling worker. For weeks since he'd seen Jonah quietly scraping food from plates he didn't eat, just to survive. For weeks since he'd realized that numbers on a spreadsheet meant nothing if they didn't reflect the dignity and well-being of the people keeping the business alive. And now, standing in the newly repainted dining room of that very diner, Elias looked out over something entirely different, a place transformed not just by policy, but by purpose. Gone were the flickering overhead lights and the broken cash register that hadn't been replaced in over a year. The old, peeling paint had been covered in warm earth tones, and the cracked tiles near the entrance had been redone with fresh, slip-proof flooring. Even the wobbly tables had been replaced with sturdy oak pieces Elias had ordered from a local carpenter. But it wasn't the decor that struck him most. It was the people. Where once there had been silence, now there was laughter. Where there had been fear, now there was community. The team, once fragmented and resigned, moved with rhythm and energy. Jonah, in a crisp black polo and name tag that now read manager, gave a quiet nod to each team member as he passed by. His posture was different now, straighter, more assured. His eyes still held the same kindness, but they gleamed now with something new: confidence. Behind the counter, a new hire named Rachel handed a wrapped sandwich to a homeless man who'd wandered earlier. No one questioned it. It was part of the new protocol. No one would be turned away hungry. Megan, one of the veteran servers who had nearly quit under the old regime, had returned from a brief hiatus. She was now head server and helped train new staff. She greeted regulars by name, and the regulars had started tipping more generously, noticing the difference in service and spirit. Elias sat in his favorite corner booth, the same one where he'd once pretended to be a nobody sipping burnt coffee. Now, he was greeted with warmth, but not reverence. That's how he wanted it. Respect, yes, but not fear. He had made a personal rule. No one was to stand straighter or speak more cautiously just because he walked in. If they couldn't speak to him the same way they spoke to one another, he hadn't done his job as a leader. The transformation hadn't been easy. The first 2 weeks were filled with tension as employees waited to see if the changes would actually stick. Elias knew the danger of performative reform, the kind of corporate lip service that promised change without delivering. So he made sure every promise was backed by action. Wages were increased and delivered on time. Breaks were scheduled into the new digital system that clocked reminders to managers. Staff meetings were held weekly, and anonymous feedback was not only encouraged but publicly addressed. But even more surprising were the changes happening outside that diner. Across the entire Thor Hospitality Group, news of the undercover visit and the sweeping changes Elias had implemented had spread internally like wildfire. Emails flooded his inbox from workers in other locations, some shocked, others inspired, most curious. "Is it true?" they asked. "Are things really changing?" Elias responded to every message personally. He created a new department, Employee Advocacy and Culture. Its sole job? Listening. Not marketing. Not HR compliance. Just listening and then acting. He promoted internal candidates from the kitchen and front lines into leadership positions and established a scholarship fund for employees pursuing education in any field, not just hospitality. He started a mentorship program pairing longtime employees like Jonah with new hires in different cities. And the ripple effects extended even further. A blog post written by a food industry reporter about the undercover boss who changed everything went viral. Soon, Elias was receiving interview requests for major publications, but he declined most of them. "This isn't about me," he told a journalist from the Wall Street Chronicle. "It's about remembering who we are when the cameras are off and the spreadsheets are closed. Business isn't just about profits. It's about people." One day, while reviewing some paperwork in his office at HQ, Elias received a brown envelope marked only with a return address and no name. Inside was a simple handwritten note. "You gave me more than food that night. You gave me back hope. Thank you. G." There was no last name, no contact info, just a small, crisp $10 bill paper-clipped to the note. Likely the same bill Jonah had once refused to keep after serving Elias a hot plate of leftovers. Elias stared at the message for a long time. He didn't need a signature. He knew exactly who it was from. Back at the diner, things continued to improve. A month turned into 2, and then into a full quarter. The location that had once ranked lowest in employee morale now had the highest retention rate in the company. Customer reviews had climbed from 3.1 stars to a solid 4.7. But the most valuable metrics couldn't be measured in stars or numbers. Jonah now led morning huddles where he encouraged team members to share one thing they were grateful for before the shift. It started awkwardly, but soon became a tradition. "Coffee," one server would say. "A good night's sleep," said another. "My team," Jonah would always add. It wasn't corporate nonsense. It was authentic, and that's why it worked. Elias had returned to his regular schedule, but visited the diner weekly. Not to check up on anyone, but to check in. One afternoon, as he sipped a freshly brewed coffee that Jonah himself had selected for the new supplier deal, a customer approached the table. "You the owner?" the man asked. "I am," Elias replied. Well, I've been eating here for 5 years. Almost left for good last year. But lately, something's different. The people, the energy, feels like family again. I don't know what you did, but thank you. Elias smiled. Wasn't just me, he said. It was them. That night, Elias stood outside the diner under the soft glow of the new neon sign they'd installed over the door. It read simply, Thorns, good food, good people. He looked through the window and saw Jonah laughing with Rachel, Megan playfully flicking a dish towel at a line cook, and the clatter of plates harmonizing with the hum of joy. He'd come in to catch problems. Instead, he'd rediscovered his purpose. The journey hadn't been about punishing the bad. It had been about elevating the good. It wasn't just a story about a boss catching wrongdoing. It was about what happens when a leader steps down from the pedestal, rolls up their sleeves, and chooses to see the world from the eyes of those who make it all possible. And in doing so, Elias Thorne didn't just change a diner. He changed lives, including his own.